When you have two qualified centers you
Yes.
could go to, what are other things to think about?
Perfectly said.
Don't you think we're better together? Oh, I think we are.
3, 2, 1. Good morning! Hey guys, and today we are going to talk about healthcare centers.
So I have cystic fibrosis, which is a lung disease that I was born with. And so we make everyday videos about life with cystic fibrosis and what it looks like for us. I've been to 7 different cystic fibrosis care centers in different states: Maryland, Illinois, Massachusetts, and then in Scotland, over in the UK.
And in a couple of those, she was part of both the pediatric and adult centers. And so we thought it would be probably helpful, even for us, to just process here on camera about what Mary's experiences have been at these different centers. And we know that a lot of people who might be watching this video at some point will have to decide on what healthcare center to go to, or even just how to evaluate a healthcare center that you visit for the first time. And I think along the journey we have formed some categories that we have thought about healthcare centers by, and I know Mary's got a wealth of experience, but it's our experience. It's limited to where we've been. So it's more, I think the helpful thing at the end of this video, I hope, can be the categories to think about, not necessarily conclusions about how to think about those categories, but...
Right, because everybody's different, so their conclusions about the categories will be different. I actually started thinking about this a few years ago when we were looking at a job change, which was probably going to take us to a new state. So I started thinking and calling different cystic fibrosis centers in that state, and I realized quickly I need to think in my own mind and have a list of what questions are important for me to ask. So thus concludes or begins the conversation about these categories of questions to ask.
I think before anything, most people go online, Google a center, and you can read the bios of the doctors. And most centers have qualified doctors, and I mean, I think that's probably a first step, is seeing what doctors are there. Are they qualified in whatever area of medical care you're looking at? Your
current doctor might recommend a certain doctor who's at a center, so that's another place to start. If
like when you went to Chicago,
yep,
your pediatric doctors recommended a doctor there in Chicago, right?
Yeah, I think their conclusion was they're all great doctors out there, so you would be fine going to any center, but I know this doctor. And I think that's kind of where we're leaning this video and how to think about centers, is when you have two qualified centers you could go to, what are other things to think about? Perfectly said. So user experience, we're talking from the time you drive in and park your car, go in, do your business, and come back out to the car. That whole experience, how does that work for you and your lifestyle? Such as if there was a Chick-fil-A in between the car and the room, like that would be a big bonus. That would go on the pro list. Okay, so before we start talking about details, everyone is going to be different about their preferences, things they like, things they dislike, and so that's totally up to you. This is just what we have found works for us. The flow of clinic, we have learned, matters to us. Mm-hmm. Like, where do you go first? What do you do next? What waiting rooms do you go to? All of those things, right? We were in a clinic where there were 3 different waiting rooms that we had to wait in before we saw the doctor. You wait in a waiting room to check in. You wait in a waiting room to have testing done. For me, it was pulmonary function test. And then you wait in a waiting room for your clinic room. And at face value, of course, I'm wearing my mask and everything. It is what it is. You do what you gotta do. But at the end of those clinic days, we both walked out with a massive clinic headache because we were under those lights for 3 different waiting rooms plus being in the clinic room. And we realized, wow, that is so exhausting for us. Like, that took a huge strain on us. Another way that clinics are sometimes run is with 0 waiting rooms, but that means you have to leave the floor. And some of these, if you're not familiar with cystic fibrosis care, some of these things might seem a little bit strange. One of the most important things in cystic fibrosis care is infection control and prevention, which is a fancy way of saying, how can we make sure that the bacteria in my lungs doesn't get transferred to another cystic fibrosis patient while we're both waiting to go to clinic? And so that goes into a huge part of how we think about our experience at a hospital. And so at another clinic, like I said, there was a 0 waiting room policy, meaning if there isn't a room ready for you, you gotta leave the floor. That's to lessen the chances that you'll be closely interacting with other cystic fibrosis patients. And so you literally leave the floor and you've gotta go find something somewhere else to be, get somewhere out in the open air, and don't be huddling around with other patients. And you leave your cell phone number and they call you when your room is ready. In that experience, we had very few times that they didn't have a room ready. So we have had to leave the floor, but maybe only a couple times in many years. So that's another way that we've seen it done.
Yeah, and so when Mary started calling those clinics, we were thinking about all these different centers. One of the questions she would ask is, how do you do infection control? And so that was a category that we wanted to think through. And how does that relate to experience? And how does it relate to how safe you feel when you go and visit?
I don't know if this is a valid thing to point out, but like the people who you interact with, like the check-in people or the nurses, are they pleasant enough to be around? I don't know if is that a valid thing to point out? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think personalities is a real thing to consider.
For the like main healthcare team, probably not the check-in people, because those people might fluctuate.
Yeah. But
your nurse practitioner, and the physicians in that clinic, do you vibe with the way they communicate? And again, this comes down to, kind of what we're talking about is if you have 2 qualified centers that you're trying to think about.
Yeah. Right now we're talking about clinic in this kind of this outpatient setting. And one of the questions to ask is, how is an outpatient setting handled in terms of who do you see when you come in?
Do you see the physician? Do you see the nurse practitioner? Do you see everybody every time?
Do you see the same doctor? Do you see different doctors? Because in many ways, it really changes the experience. And I think I would say that question right there is a huge distinguishing factor between all the centers you've been to.
Yeah, some take more of a team approach where the doctors rotate the patients so that everybody knows everybody. Other centers I've been to, you kind of have your main doctor, and of course if they can't see you, there are many qualified physicians who can see you, but you have that main doctor who follows your case. So those are 2 separate models. I've been in both. I've seen strengths in both. I've seen weaknesses in both.
I know for CF clinics, most have a nurse practitioner. Whether there's one nurse practitioner who you see more frequently, or are there multiple, and how does how do those relationships work? I think it's something to think about and something to consider, especially with who you are as a person. I think some people will gravitate toward different models.
Yeah, and the only reason I realize that these are things to think about is because of my past experiences. You know, when I was first growing up, all I knew was the center that I grew up in. And then I went off to college, and then we moved to another state, and I started learning, wait, they don't do it like how I grew up. I was learning like, oh, there's different ways of doing things. Oh, this way is not my favorite. Oh, wow, I like the way this place does it. And so you learn yourself, and then you can better communicate what you feel comfortable with. So then at clinic, if they say, when your test results come in, what's the best way for us to communicate with you? You'll know, like, hey, a call really stresses me out, especially if I'm coughing a lot, so an email's perfect. or maybe your CF center doesn't use email and a call is the only way, so then you make it work, or whatever.
I think that's a helpful segue, because I was going to say the next category would probably be communication. How does your clinic communicate? We've been in a clinic where it was text messages. We've been in a clinic where it was emails. We've been in a clinic where it was phone calls. I think those are the main categories. I don't think we've ever had a send a fax.
Or carrier pigeon. I think my favorite of those three...
Carrier pigeon?
Definitely. I think email.
That's just the easiest often for you. But
yeah, the one clinic that used text, I kind of liked that as well.
Yeah, I think it's just a question to ask when you're looking at a healthcare center. How do I communicate? Say it's a Friday night and I start coughing up blood. Who do I call? And
yes.
And I think the biggest thing probably for most clinics isn't that it's how you communicate, it's that there's a plan of communication.
Right. And I think another thing to think about in this conversation is knowing what you prefer, but also being able to adjust your expectations.
Yeah. Yep.
So knowing the main important things, and if those are intact, so for us, like infection control is really high on our priority list if we were to have to move clinics or something. And then also communication is pretty high on our list, but I can adjust my expectations for that. So having your top couple priorities, and then anything else you've got to be flexible with.
Yeah.
And only in learning to be flexible have I learned other ways that I actually prefer. So I never, when I went to the clinic that used text message, that was completely new to me. I never even realized that was a thing. And I learned I kind of like that. But then, going back to a clinic that doesn't use that, it's fine. You learn to work around it, and that's fine.
Okay, so that's more of like outpatient setting. Let's talk about
Yes.
inpatient for a moment, because that's for a lot of people another whole nother dimension.
Right. So inpatient, you've got questions about, let's talk broadly, whether it's CF or not. Am I going to be in a single room, or is there going to be a roommate? For me, I would ask, what's the inpatient infection control protocol? What is the physical therapy like? Or how do I get my airway clearance? How often?
Are you going to be on the same floor every time that you're admitted, or are you on a different floor? Will you see the same nurses and that sort of thing? And some people, like, that might not be an issue at all, like you don't care, but for some people you'd like to know those things.
And some people I know are admitted quite frequently, and so knowing that they are going to know the nurses helps them handle their reality of being admitted frequently.
I think the process of admission, how does that go? Like, do you have to go through the ER every time?
Right.
Do you, are they going to arrange everything and then you come in and the room's ready? How does that work?
One hospital I was in, they knew I was coming in, and I was fairly new to this hospital, but I had been admitted before. And one of the men who worked on the floor, he knew that I liked Twix bars. And literally I walked into my hospital room and on my pillow were 2 little Twix bars. And it just made me melt because I just felt cared for and loved. And I'll say that's never happened again. But sometimes they write a little note on my whiteboard and that makes me feel loved. But I want to point out that at all of these different hospitals I've been to, there are pros and cons, there are benefits and downfalls. There is absolutely no perfect system.
And I'd venture to say that a hospital that is strong in one area is probably going to be weak in another one of these areas.
And I'll also say, like, there are some clinics that I remember being in and I couldn't wait to switch. And there are others that made me cry when I left. But through all of those different clinics, there have been people in my experiences there that I have learned things from.
Yeah.
So even if you find yourself in a less than ideal situation, from my experience, I still learned things that I still think about in my daily CF care today. Even though I'm thankful I'm not in that hospital system anymore, I still learned things while I was there, and I'm thankful for that. So you can learn from your experiences. And sometimes, maybe as you're watching this video, you're thinking, wow, now that I think about it, there are a lot of things that really make me tilt my head when I think about my hospital system. Maybe there's some questions to ask.
Yeah, I know for a large majority of people, like, you don't have another option. Like,
Right.
Your hospital situation is, and like, we have frustrations, and we've had frustrations all along the journey where it's like, this is the way it is, but then now that we've thought about these categories, how do we continue to make this enjoyable, or as enjoyable as it can be?
Right. Or like we were talking about earlier, this all started to come to our mind when we were looking at if we had to move to a different state.
Mm-hmm.
What questions do we ask? So I hope that that was interesting to you if you're not in the medical world, or if you are a patient of some sort. I hope that that was helpful, thinking through the questions to ask or the things to consider when looking at a new CF or any center.
So thanks for watching, and as always,
we will see you tomorrow. Good night.
Don't you think
And of course,
We'll end with the cutest poodle in the world. Say goodnight to the people.